please start.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This afternoon we have a topic which is extremely topical, as you all know, the ongoing energy crisis, and in particular to try and dive down in the question, should we have a wholesale price cap for gas, or probably more precisely, what are the challenges in designing one that makes a great deal of sense? And we have four speakers today. We have Oliver Koch, who unfortunately is a little late today, which I think is perfectly understandable considering how the Commission is completely overwhelmed, followed by three presentations. Our very own Alberto, Pototschnig and Ilaria Conti from the FSR, who've been working quite in detail on the issue of wholesale price caps. Then we have Bernd Weber from EPICO. EPICO is a little bit the new think tank on the block in Brussels. Who've also been doing a considerable amount of work on this. And the third speaker is Oscar Arnedillo from NERA Economic Consulting. Please feel free, everybody, to post questions or comments in the chat, which we will pass on to these speakers. And so, Ilaria and Alberto, if I can pass the floor first to you.
Okay, hope the share screening works. Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Christopher, for the invitation and for the kind introduction. Yes, while we are waiting for Oliver to join the debate, Alberto and I will quickly illustrate the content of two policy briefs that we wrote together very recently, actually in the last month, about capping the price of gas in the EU. So a very topical issue, as you mentioned, Christopher. But before starting, perhaps it's worth making some preliminary considerations. So first of all, with our two policy briefs, we do not really suggest that a European gas price cap should be introduced, so we do not promote it. Indeed, this is a political decision. So what we do actually with our work, with our publications, is to illustrate how a price cap, if introduced, could be designed. And particularly considering that such measures are exceptional measures, and indeed the situation we are living at the moment with the invasion of Ukraine from Russia is indeed an exceptional situation. On the other hand, we also think we start from the consideration that imposing a cap only on Russian gas could be considered a sanction, is in fact a sanction, whereas if introduced via a regulatory mechanism applying to all pipeline gas, a cap would be even smoother to be integrated, to be put into place. And then probably the most important consideration we started from in our proposal is considering that the gas market in Europe can actually be broadly split into two segments. So we do not only have pipeline gas in Europe, although this has traditionally covered the most of our demand, but we also have gas imported into the EU via LNG. And although we are talking about very similar types of gas, from physically speaking, the dynamics to which these two ways of two types of gas are imported or are managed in Europe is profoundly different. Therefore, we think that when designing a cap on European gas, we should take into account this difference. So in brief, in a nutshell, what our proposal consists of, it's a two-part strategy. So we have basically two pillars. The first pillar addressing measures to reduce the price of pipeline gas, as I said, traded in Europe. So for this, we propose two alternative solutions which actually could work even better if applied in parallel. One is the the regulatory use of some technical functionalities that already exist in some cases at gas exchanges, called interval price limits. And they are basically automatic mechanisms which come into place when there is an extreme volatility of gas prices. So basically, the exchange automatically blocks bids and offers that exceed a certain price limit or price range. The alternative, also still addressing pipeline gas, would be to establish a sort of cap actually for TSOs when they act in the balancing market. So it would translate as a regulatory mandate to TSOs to sell and buy gas at a predefined price or range in the balancing market. So basically, when there is an imbalance at the end of the day in any balancing market, the price at which shippers could buy gas from the TSO would have to be limited at a certain range. We will see later in details what consequences this would have, obviously. The second pillar of our strategy instead addresses LNG and suggests the organization of auctions for sourcing LNG for the EU on the global gas market. So regarding the first pillar, I think it's quite intuitive, quite self-explanatory. We are really talking about technical functionalities which could guide the gas price down. So in fact, by introducing these interval price limits, of course, in a homogeneous way all over Europe, then we would have potentially and eventually an alignment of long-term contracts to the cap price. This is because most of long-term contracts, as we know, are indexed to the spot price. So it would be, let's say, a sort of a virtuous circle which would be introduced with a very simple measure. Of course, there are some limitations and important considerations to be made, because if this limit would only apply to the gas traded on organized marketplaces, so at this exchanges, while we know that it's not the only way of trading gas, it's not the only instrument. So it would be possible that putting a limit on exchanges would then leak to the trading happening via OTC, via over the counter. Regarding the other option, also addressing pipeline gas, maybe here we have the opportunity to explain, although briefly, what it would entail. So we said that the price of balancing gas. So the impact on can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
yes, okay, sorry. I had a warning from my computer. So this would obviously give birth to a very different way of trading gas in the balancing market. We know that at the moment, what the TSOs have is a residual role in the balancing market. Because most of the balancing duties fall on the shippers. In this case, the TSOs would have, let's say, an upgraded role, because it would be responsible for selling missing gas volumes to the shippers in probably bigger quantities, at least at the beginning. Therefore, the price of spot trading would align to the predefined price range, because it would be the cheapest gas that shippers could procure on the market. And therefore, their portfolio strategies, their trading strategies would then revolve around this predefined price. At the same time, this would probably lead to some missing volumes of gas. And therefore, that's why we need the second leg of this proposal, because the TSOs would have to procure the missing volumes of gas on some other markets, which in our proposal would be the LNG. I see Alberto is...
No, Ilaria, I think I think one point that is worth making is that we don't know how big this missing volumes would be. And I guess it depends also on the credibility of the measure. Because if the measure were credible, i.e., the market could be convinced that this measure is going to be there for whatever period of time is necessary, and there is a full agreement across Europe that would be implemented and kept. Well, when faced with the prospect of not being able to sell gas at any price higher than the cap for a long period of time, and especially if this cap is set at a remunerative level. Gas has been traded at below 20 euros per megawatt hour for years before the crisis, and rarely went up beyond 30. So I think there is somehow, if this price were set at a remunerative level, and if this policy were credible, then I think maybe trading would still occur as we know and as we knew in the past, and therefore the role of the TSO might remain marginal. So credibility, I think is worth stressing. The credibility and also the long-term prospect of the measure is critical in determining how much missing gas the TSO would have to procure, because external exporters might delay maybe some flows of gas, but I don't think that many of the external exporters of pipeline gas to Europe have, at least in the short term, many alternatives of what to do with this gas, and they need to sort of put it somewhere, send it somewhere. So I think that's, we don't know. And this is why we propose the second leg of the approach, but I think credibility can play a big role.
Yeah, very good point, Alberto. Indeed, credibility and harmonization in the implementation is, of course, essential for this proposal to be successful. Indeed, so the missing volumes of gas that TSOs would need to procure could then be procured via LNG, and therefore, dealing with these possible missing volumes of gas, we would have to, what our proposal envisages is basically two alternatives. The TSOs could procure the missing volumes by themselves, but this is not the option that we actually recommend. What we recommend would be to procure these missing volumes of gas via a single buyer entity, which could be similar to the one that the European Commission is working at. This would have the advantage of having a more, let's say, better organized entity for the joint procurement of these missing volumes. Obviously there will be some premia to be paid for the LNG in order to make sure that the LNG is still delivered to Europe by the suppliers, by external suppliers. There would be a premium to be paid, and that should be recovered through regulation. Of course, it would be the single buyer entity who could be made responsible for the procurement, and therefore also the payment of the premium, which would then be recovered by regulation in the member states. The ones that you see with the red circle, the two options the two elements you see circled in red, are the ones on which we actually focus our second policy brief, because these were in fact the two elements of the strategy which received many questions, and therefore we felt the need to clarify further, to explain further in a second policy brief how the gas eventually procured is then reallocated, the missing gas, and how the regulatory mechanism to recover premia could work. And I would stop here.
Yeah, also because I've seen that think Oliver has joined. So, I mean, I would have some
great.
comments, but I guess with Oliver joining, I think it's better. I don't know, Christopher, back to you.
Sure, thank you. I'll pass the floor back to you, Alberto, after we've had the good fortune to speak to Oliver. Oliver, we can't see you. I hope you can hear us. Now we can see you. Well, we can
Good
see
afternoon.
you.
Yeah, sorry, I was in, it was somehow not visible, but I'm here in Brussels. I don't know if my camera works. It should work. I heard every word that Ilaria presented, so all should be fine.
Fantastic. So, Oliver, the busiest man in Brussels, thank you very much indeed for taking the time in between drafting your weekly package of legislation to talk to us. We all realise that in the Commission, the fastest route to a short career is telling everybody what the Commission is going to do before it does it. But we would be really, really grateful to hear your thoughts as to where the EU may go in relation to wholesale price caps and how that fits in with the overall framework in relation to dealing with the energy crisis. So, Oliver, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. What I want to do, and I hope it works, I would like to share my screen, and you give me, please, a short indication if this works.
It works perfectly.
Yes. That's wonderful. So I'm really happy to be here. This was, of course, cooked up a little bit when Chris asked me, when would you like this to happen? It was a bit 1.5 hours too early, the whole thing, because in 1.5 hours, right after this event, you will switch for all interested to the Commission's press conference, and at 3:30, we will indeed present the new baby around, which has elements of what we will discuss in the next hour. Bear with me that I cannot now, 1 hour before, explain the last details of what we have presented. But I can say it's worth looking into it. It's highly complex. It is a mix of measures. I think there were already, like always, leaks around and versions. So most of you will have an idea of how this looks. And it's not so different from what different press articles have reported. But what is clear is that from all the packages we have presented, one of the more complex ones, also for member states, also for academics. And that's why I signed up today here, and that's why I'm here, because I think it's so useful to structure the debate, which is impossible for politicians to structure, and where we see every 1-2 weeks a new non-paper, paper, consensus paper, 15 countries paper popping up, where unfortunately electricity is mixed with gas, subsidies are mixed with price caps, external measures are mixed with internal, TTF measures are mixed with wholesale price caps, emergency measures are mixed with normal market interventions, and I could go on and go on. So one caveat, what I will say, it's my personal opinion. Please bear with me. I spent indeed the last 96 hours, I would say, and that's the reason for my slight delay with putting together some new package after we have put together also previous packages. And I think that's a bit where I regret not to have enough exchange with academia and with experts. We are so quick that whenever the latest paper comes out, so this seminar, for instance, in a way, it's super useful, but as you will see, we have indeed opted for certain models. And the good news is, Alberto, Ilaria, we can still work on it. This proposal, which will be presented in 1.5 hours, has interestingly 2 articles that are open. So for the experts who read it, they will realize it's about proposals and developing further proposals. And that's your window of opportunity to further advise us, to further work with us, because we have a bit of time not to get it totally wrong when we will implement what needs still to be implemented from today's proposal. And that's why it's so useful to discuss with you today. It is a very difficult process also here inside. That's the last thing I can reveal. Of course, we have 27 member states. We have 27 commissioners from 27 member states, all with their own ideas. What we put together will be an interesting mix of security of supply measures, of platform measures, of gas price measures, and you will get a wonderful summary in 1.5 hours or only 1 hour. And for those who are smart, who will discover in the one slide I have prepared already a great deal of the package that we will present in an hour. And indeed, I was not able to present many slides. It's essentially one slide I want to talk about a few minutes now that I will show to you. Just reminding, and that's what I want to do before, because, I mean, I say it also to my commissioners and my management here when we discuss about new measures. We have already done quite a bit. And for us, it was a bit surprising, for instance, that after what we call the Robin Hood regulation, the windfall profit cap measure, the next day we had an intense discussion about the Spanish price cap in the council and everywhere. Because indeed, the measure we adopted just a few weeks ago was precisely meant to bring money back to those affected through hopefully smarter measures than subsidization of companies. But that was not recognized, and it was not necessarily helping in the debate. So for us, it is very difficult also to explain that there is already things out. The last baby before the Robin Hood regulation was the demand reduction regulation, super important, still not activated. And that's indeed something where many of you will agree that demand reduction is the key, but without the politicians daring to tell people that we now need to get a bit more serious, it will have a bit a limited effect, because most of it is a may provision in this whole regulation, unless you activate the alert and make it binding. So before we had a storage regulation, wonderful thing. Indeed, storages are full, whether it's our benefit or whether it has at least contributed, that's up to you. But I just say we go indeed in an incredible rhythm, and that's why we need more than ever academic and expert input. So that's also a call, really, help us take part actively and take part quickly. We also talk to ASA, the normal rhythm, Alberto, you know it, of an ASA paper is 2-3 months. This is just too late these days. And although I publish happily now the last kind of product of a 70-pager from this house, I cannot promise you that in 3 weeks already we will have the next one. So we need to be extremely quick. So enough on the introduction. I have one remark on the invitation. And I quote the invitation that I found, and I was smiling when I looked at it again today. What is very good and the like is this language of 1,000 price increase, 1,000%. That's quite dramatic, and that's it. But you have also the sentence, I must say, however, these measures, all what we've done, we've done indeed quite a lot. Emergency intervention, the Robin Hood legislation, and all before, demand reduction, all these crazy emergency council regulation without parliament. And then you say, however, these measures partially treat the symptoms of high gas prices are not the cause. So that's for me one of the pitfalls in the discussions. And I wonder whether we don't fall into it often. Yes, that's precisely right. We treat the symptoms, and all measures we propose treat the symptoms, because at least those with whom I talk and my experts tell me that it is very difficult to go against gas prices that are high if the underlying causes of the high gas prices in demand and supply are just there. It is not for us to abolish the war in Russia. It is not for us to abolish the fact that Chinese demand and Asian demand will kick off, and that we just have a situation indeed of high prices. Another question, and that's what we will discuss now, is the question of skyrocketing and price peaks of 350 and other areas. There are many attempts of papers to map a bit the different measures. You know, I think we ourselves have published a non-paper, or did we publish it, or was it only leaked? I don't know, on different gas price caps. What I want to do with you now, just for 10 minutes, is to go through one slide, one single slide, that I put very quickly together, but which illustrates a bit what is on the agenda and what is being discussed. And I'm sure I've lost and left out quite a few of them, and there are additional ones. But I think it is very important also for the politicians to really try to say, what are we talking about? Are we talking about kind of external gas imports? Are we talking about measures at hubs? Are we talking about actually the gas market or the electricity market? When everybody in the council, when we talk about gas price caps, the first thing they mention is, oh yeah, the Iberian measure. It's a gas subsidy, yeah, but it's a gas subsidy to do something on electricity prices. So to bring some order into the debate, I really am grateful for any article that doesn't go into the last economic detail, but explains our politicians how things work and what is at stake. What's the difference between a wholesale and a retail intervention? That may be clear to you, but if you have in Germany the word Gaspreisbremse or such measure, nobody knows what we talk about. Today, what we publish is a Gaspreisbremse in German press. So it's a gas price cap. But it is, of course, a highly different thing whether we talk about these measures. And before I come to this, I just would say one thing also concerning this seminar. I personally, I'm still very frustrated about the fact that all politicians and also academia, because all politicians talk about it and they publish one council paper after the other, talk about wholesale market interventions. And the results of all the papers I read are relatively clear. And the result is that indeed, as we cannot fight supply and demand, and as the underlying root causes will not go away just by regulatory intervention, the smartest intervention is and remains possibly an intervention at consumer level, at industrial, retail, whatever consumer level. There are many nice models out, Mr. Schlecht's option models, other models that are there. Nevertheless, we discuss all over the place, how can we do something on the wholesale, the bad bet, more wholesale markets with their bad bet high prices. I'm personally not very happy about it, and I would be very happy if we could turn a bit of the discussion back to retail and back to the consumer level and support. The second one, again, demand reduction remains key. I just say it. If we are not able to really activate this as a least intrusive means to address the current severe problem of peaking gas prices, this will be just very, very inefficient. So that's why they are in white. They are just not addressed now, and I deeply think they should be addressed very soon, and that's the right track, actually. So let's talk about the tricky track, the 10, 11 measures I've put there, and let's maybe get through that. So first observation, big confusion between wholesale and retail cap in the everything outside an expert's room. It is very difficult to convey this message, but it is a tremendous difference. I think we all agree on this in this virtual room here, but it is very important. And the 200 billions or the 300 billions in Germany that were just discussed are, of course, not a wholesale intervention. They have wholesale market effects on other wholesale markets, maybe than energy, if you pump billions to industries. And that's something that is, of course, serious if it's uncoordinated. And that's precisely what happens if we do uncoordinated retail interventions. And that's why I'm a bit disappointed that we don't try to focus a bit more at that level. But that remains to be seen how the next weeks develop. At least we have some opening from Germany to be ready to, for the first time, give a bit of money into this discussion. Second point, again and again, Iberian model being presented as a gas price cap. No, this is about an electricity measure with a gas subsidy. Now, we would very much like to talk about gas subsidization, because indeed that's what it is. It is favored by many, and we have some member states who are fiercely trying to convince other member states who are fiercely against it to implement it. I think the Commission has signaled openness to discuss it, and that's what we are doing. But we would really also ask everybody with a bit of expertise to look at the facts, to look at the cross-border effects, to look at the real costs of this. And just to give you an example, one complexity in the debate, all the figures we see, they are kind of calculated as if the Electricity Act we have just published end of September was not in force. So if you are now obliged to redistribute the benefits to the consumers, what is the actual benefit of the Spanish measure on top of what we call the Robin Hood or the windfall tax measure? Does it make sense to do both in parallel? I've read very few articles who discuss this at all, and I think it's a very pertinent question. We now went for a measure that eliminates or gives back extra benefits. Is it really meaningful to do both? It's an open question to you, but I would like to see discussed at some point. And that's a very actual question we are discussing inside the House when we talk about Spanish or Iberian measures. Going forward, what you see in the left bottom down there, this is all external measures. Yeah, we depend on external gas supplies. So, and that was in the last weeks, the dominating topic still, cap on Russian gas. Let's just do it. And some said they will have to deliver because they're just interested. Now, after the explosion of Nord Stream, it's maybe less of an issue anymore. We have a few percentages still Russian gas in the system, a bit of LNG, but it has disappeared a bit from the debate, I would say. It is highly complex, legally very interesting. We had some seminars and discussions about this. I would not focus today on it. But of course, in all these external measures, the same questions arise. LNG, oil, only pipeline gas, also LNG. Of course, future contracts, but probably also ongoing contracts. How does this work? The old idea is to just do an import tariff or levy instead of a cap. The bets that this would work with Russia are really a bet, probably. If, I mean, you read every day Russia Today like I do on my little app, you see the announcements, what happens if we announce any form of tariff or price cap. And I would personally not be surprised that indeed it would not be an economic behavior that would prevail, which would be deliver as much gas to Europe, but we might indeed see a complete Russian disruption in this scenario. So gas price cap, import ban, the tariff model, that's what we've discussed in the last weeks. The import price cap, yeah, we just say all gas from Norway, all gas from others cannot be imported at a higher price then. And now we come into the details. Is an import price cap equals it a TTF cap? Because, for instance, Norwegian gas is to large extent TTF cap. So is a TTF cap an import cap on Norwegian gas? That's difficult to say, but it matters a lot also politically. And that is something where the measures overlap. They're very close to each other. Alberto's and Ilaria's balancing intervention is very close to circuit breakers, is very close to what you see on the right bottom line there. That's the group of measures at hubs, at spots, at marketplaces that are now being discussed. So on the bottom left, number 3, 4, 5, 6 import price measures are a bit out of the scope now of the discussion, probably because indeed the Russian gas, we've lost it anyway. And the others, we are now talking about diplomacy. And I already give you some key to this little slide here. So what is underlined is actually our policy. It's actually in legislation or in our policy. So number 6, cap through diplomacy is indeed our declared policy goal for now. So for now, you read it also in the Council conclusions, we say for now we don't do an import cap on external providers. If this diplomacy attempt fails, we do something else. I just give you a little illustration where this comes from. If the politicians get on Twitter slides like this, of course they ask us, you must do something. This the Norwegian revenues on gas prices, and it's of course obvious that we could try to say, listen, guys, we love each other. We are together in the EA and in the EFTA cooperation. Should we not have something more reasonable? I personally think it would be much better indeed that we could have a diplomatic agreement than any form of confrontation, especially in any EFTA context. But of course, we have a serious problem here, and we need to solve it. And I cannot tell it how this will end. It's just indeed our very clear line. First step, diplomacy, but second step, we will not hesitate to enact the second step. And all I can say is, when we talk about crazy measures, I don't say we are Putin, but what you see in the last 3-4 weeks or month, we don't shy away of radical measures these days. And what we've done with the windfall measures, I mean, they're radical. What we've done today, you will see this is something we have not thought about 1 year ago. So let's come to the right-hand side, number 7, joint purchasing. Just one word on this. I mean, we've been sitting on this for months now. And there's so many good articles that say, and Alberto went in the same direction, say, listen, if gas is missing, we just get it via joint purchase. I would just invite you, sit with your lawyers, sit together, sit with your the companies that pay you, and ask them, how can you be forced, how can we convince you to participate in joint purchase? Because the fascinating thing about joint purchasing is nobody on earth prevents any 2 companies today to do joint purchasing, or any 3, or any 5, or any 10. Nobody does it. Nobody wants it. Nobody has approached us so far, or the emir from Qatar. So emir of Qatar, he sees the Germans coming, he sees the Italians coming separately. So we realized we need to push it more actively. But if I read the articles, the very good Bruegel and other articles, also from the Florence school, that say, this is just the solution. Let's do joint purchasing. I can just invite you, please tell us how mandatory joint purchasing should work. And I talk about purchasing. Yeah, what we can do, and what you see has underlined in this presentation, which gives you a hint what will come in our proposal, is about participation in tendering, participation in demand aggregation. That is something we can do, and that makes maybe sense to say, guys, at least travel together to the emir. Yeah, don't go separately. This is crazy. Inform each other of what you're doing and what you're planning to do. But I wait for this meeting to tell us how on earth can we force joint gas purchasing unless we nationalize gas purchasing. That's fine. And then we say, okay, it's now an end of private gas imports. We give it to the state, and then the states get together and jointly purchase gas. Easy solution. Happy to do it, but I'm personally not sure it is a solution where we all would have thought through the side effects if we abolish markets and nationalize gas purchases. So the idea of gas purchases, joint gas purchasing, is way more complex than many, at least articles, seem to imply. And I would very much be happy about people following on, giving us idea how we can go the second step from aggregation, which may be not binding and may not end in contracts, to binding, really binding joint purchasing. How can we incentivize it? How can we make meaningful balance between competition rules, which need to be respected unless we want even higher prices for consumers, and the incentives to do this and not be afraid of competition rules? Give us input. Please write the articles on this one. You will also see underlined price cap after emergency. We have some nice articles from I think Carsten Neuhoff and others who have developed the idea of, let's do a price cap, but only if the emergency is declared and the risk that prices skyrocket is really real. And that's indeed something where you will find some material in what we will publish in a few minutes. It is not yet ready. It is something that will be developed, but we have a commitment indeed, and think it is a good idea not to run into an extreme crisis of emergency in a situation where we don't have functioning distribution mechanism and allocation mechanisms for gas. Because the worst nightmare we all have here in DG NERA, I don't know how it's in Florence, for me is at least, and for my colleagues, that we have a scarcity, we have not enough gas in a very cold winter, and we start hitting at each other, doing export bans, doing cross-border closures, keeping the gas for ourselves, and not being able to agree on how to share gas. This is not only economically the biggest risk, it's also politically, possibly and very likely, the biggest risk in this entire crisis. So we address this, we will address this with emergency measures, but indeed for the emergency case and not for the normal market case. So, and I come to the last point, I don't want to be too long, that is in the right bottom corner. That's the latest idea, I would say. If we go to the trends of gas price cap discussions, they started very much with external measures, and now we focus on what can we do maybe with the hubs. And I personally find it very smart. If you look at prices, I think I also have a slide somewhere on this. This is the price development. Yeah, when I was, I had my short holidays in the mountains, the prices were suddenly 350, and I got very nervous emails from Brussels on this. So of course, how can it be, as Alberto has said, for 20 years prices are around 30 and suddenly we have 350? There is an issue, and there is possibly an issue that we can intelligently address with better regulation of gas trading. And that's what we indeed recognize, and that's what we will do. And that's what you will also find, discuss, and at least that has been announced already, I think, from my commissioner, that we take this seriously. But the devil also there is in the detail, and I would like you very much to give us input also what to do actually. So starting with number 9, yes. So intervening in normal gas trading, what would it mean? Just a blunt hub, if you read the member states papers, they say we need a gas wholesale price cap, full stop. Yeah, TTF 100 or 180 or whatever, that's the end of the story. If you think it through, I think we have set out our doubts in our policy papers 1-2 weeks ago, what it would mean for the market, for demand, and an unflexible price cap where the risks are. There's no final decision on this. There will be councils now in the next days and weeks deciding precisely about that. But if you don't give us more smarter solutions that we can sell to the politicians, we may risk to end up with a blunt, I could call it stupid, one-level price cap that is not dynamic, it's just there. We don't think it's the smartest solution. Smarter solution you see under number 10 and 11 as the last thing I say. I think number 10 is very close to what Alberto described. Alberto will not benefit from it, but indeed the idea to develop alternative benchmarks and to develop circuit breakers and ideas to avoid this kind of hysteria at exchanges, which is normal, which exists at all trading places. This is something that could have maybe, and many say it, prevented this 350 prices in August. It was a kind of hysteria triggered, of course, by parallel storage filling commitments at any price. But we do believe that the measures hopefully can already avoid price caps, intelligent circuit breakers, better benchmarks for gas prices. Yeah, let's develop it. It's not so complex, and Alberto knows he has set up Remit with a lot of computers. We get many of those data, and if we ask for a bit more, we can assemble very quickly, and I would say in 2 weeks, price assessments that give a view that is not worse than what ICE or Platts and others report on a daily basis. So the 3 measures on the bottom are something we think we should try urgently. And the fact that it's underlined may give you some indication how real and how close we are to this. I give you just a short sneak preview in the name: preparing, purchasing, and protecting. I don't know if the new package is the 3P package. You will learn all this in 30 minutes if you want, or in 45 minutes. I will stop it here. Sorry for going through so many things on so short notice, but I hope I could give you at least a little idea on where we stand and what for me is the most important thing to really ask for continuous and fast input to our work. We may seem busy or not responsive, but we read your papers and we are happy to schedule also bilateral meetings if you have a really good idea. Many thanks.
Oliver, thank you so much for that. In particular, I mean, thank you for your candor, and thank you for identifying really or helping us as academics to really understand the things we need to focus on to help. And I think you've identified brilliantly the really, really, really tricky things. Alberto, can I just give you the floor for a couple of minutes, because you didn't get the opportunity to comment on Ilaria's paper, and also if you have questions or comments on what Oliver has said.
Thank you, Chris. No, well, thanks a lot also to Oliver from my side. Maybe a couple of comments on what Oliver said. I mean, I agree with most of what he said. Actually, I would say all of what he said. He had a couple of questions. Well, one is clearly we don't want to kill the market unless it is necessary, so as to speak. So market should work as much as possible. It's only when the market becomes a bit crazy, then maybe we should think about interventions. And that's why when with Ilaria we proposed this approach, we said there may be a range. So there is a range of prices within which the market should be allowed to work, and we can pick. And nowadays I think TTF is down to 120, I think. So it's going up and down. But one point that I would like to sort of comment on what Oliver said is how you make joint purchasing mandatory, and our approach, which is by no means the only approach possible, but would make not mandatory but the only economic outcome of the measure. Because if you cap the price in Europe at whatever level, and then as long as that price is compatible, that cap is compatible with the market dynamics, then there is no problem. The market would stay, the cap is not binding, etc. But as soon as the market moves outside the cap, then the proposed mechanism, our proposed mechanism implies that TSOs will be able to buy at higher prices and then sell at the cap price, with difference being recovered through regulation. And they will be the only entities able to recover the difference through regulation. So no other shipper in those, or no other market participant in those situations would have an incentive to go out by themselves and buy in the market, because they would buy expensive and have to sell cheap in the European market. If the first leg of the proposal works, whatever number it is, the cap market in Europe will pay that price. And if the international price is higher because our cap price is binding, then TSOs would be the only one protected through regulation and being sort of subsidized by regulation to go out and purchase. So you don't need to make it mandatory, the participation in the joint purchasing scheme. It would happen if and when the cap in Europe is binding, and therefore it's lower than the international price. And when it is not, then the mechanism would not interfere with the market. People would be happy to trade without resorting to the TSOs for balancing gas. There will be no missing gas, and everybody can buy from the international market, which will have a price which is and sell into the European market at a price which is consistent with the international market. So I think maybe this aspect of what our proposal could be looked into to add to whatever we will hear in 38 minutes, 37 minutes, whatever it is, 41 minutes. That's it.
Thanks, Alberto. We're running out of time, which was always going to be the case in a 1-hour debate on this question, and we have the ability to go on a little bit longer. But I really want to hear from Bernd and Oscar, who've actually been, I know, working on exactly the questions that Oliver posed. So, Bernd, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, and thank you very much, Oliver. I'm really happy to participate in this very timely discussion. And yeah, I'm really excited also what the Commission is going to present. Definitely this this whole debate is moving in a breathtaking speed. So what we have done as EPICO, we published 2 papers on this. The first one was focusing a little bit similar to the Florence School of Regulation paper on a possible adoption of the wholesale price cap, focusing on imbalance market cap, and also adding LNG premium mechanism in order to attract sufficient cargoes. And the second paper, and that's what I would like to focus on, and I think it's following up nicely on what Oliver just presented, looked into the 5 major proposals that we have on the table right now and tried to evaluate it according to 5 criteria. I don't have an actual presentation on this. I just want to share with you 1 page, which was put on by Oliver as well. So very happy to see that you actually really read what we are sending you. What we did basically was we focused on the proposals of retail intervention, so block tariffs, kind of what the Germans did. Then we looked into a price cap on the European wholesale gas markets, price cap for all markets. I think that's an important point. I will come back to that. And then into the LNG, new LNG index compared to what we have now with the TTF index, the single buyer, which was already mentioned, and also the Iberian model. And we tried to evaluate it with regard to 5 criteria, which were security of supply, also the incentive to reduce gas consumption, the reduction in terms of the bills, so the price question, efficient allocation, a really difficult topic of the gas, especially in times of scarcity, of course, the financial burden, and the ease of implementation. So I won't go through all of this now. We don't have time for that. But what I would like to do, also following up on what Oliver just said, is to make a few remarks on retail intervention, on a wholesale gas cap, and also the question of a new index. And I think my first remark would be, looking into all these options, there is no good option standing out. It's not easy for policymakers. It's not easy for the Commission to come up with a good and comprehensive approach. I think all of these options have pros and cons. For example, if you intervene on a wholesale market level, that basically means that there is a risk that you cannot balance supply and demand. And at the same time, there are quite a few proposals of which we are not actually sure that they really bring down the consumer prices. And there are other options, like focusing on the retail side, like it was done in Germany, which have some advantages, but which would come with a massive fiscal implication for all member states. So maybe to start with this point, direct support for consumers, block tariffs. So here definitely the pro is that we still focus on, or we still have a price allocation mechanism, which is of course from a market perspective a very, very good thing. We can probably attract enough LNG cargoes from competing buyers in Asia. We can also reduce consumer bills in the case we adopt a wholesale block tariff option, while still incentivizing to save gas. And we don't really have a massive allocation problem here. But we looked into this, and we came up with a number when we tried to calculate this. This would require massive additional funds on the EU level. So we estimated the costs of the measures in between 240 and 550 billion if the price was kept at 50 euros per megawatt hour, just from October till March. Not to say that this would probably last longer. And of course, this is not an option for most member states. And it brings up questions like joint debt loans, for example, or also repurposing existing funds from the Next Generation EU, which is politically extremely challenging. Now, when we look now, and I try to relate it a bit to what we expect the Commission to present in a few minutes, when we look now to the question of a price cap on the European wholesale gas markets, here the tricky question is obviously, where to set this cap. If you set it too low, there's a risk that you cannot attract sufficient cargoes to meet your demand, and if you set it too high, that's also not helpful. So what I've seen from the proposal leak now was also surprising to a certain extent, because there was this idea of focusing on intraday price spike caps mechanism in order to avoid price volatility, if I understood correctly. So, but if you don't apply the cap to all the markets, I think there is a risk that the trade just would move on, for example, to over the counter. Or I'm sitting here currently in London, maybe to London, since not all the LNG trade is, of course, in the jurisdiction of the European Union, and allowing for purchasing additional volumes of LNG under price cap scenario, like a corridor, for example, obviously also undermines the whole idea of the wholesale price cap, and also has a substantial risk here to see further volumes diverted to more lucrative markets, which are not under a cap. So I think this is really interesting to see how, if we focus just on one part of the market, how we can avoid this kind of leakage problem that I tried to describe here. Another thing I would like to mention is the question of a new index. So I think there was a lot of confusion how this could actually work. And if I understand the leaks correctly, the idea is to have a cap on the TTF until the EU has been able to come up with a new index, which is focusing more on LNG prices, global prices, and less on Northwestern Europe and the constraints that we find here in terms of bottlenecks. So the big question, which I would have here, is how would this apply to long-term contracts, which regulate around 50% of the gas that we procure in Europe. And some of these long-term contracts, they would have reopener provisions. So that might actually, when we change the price index they are relating to, there is a risk that we are putting already contracted volumes at risk here. So I would be really careful when we go into this option to avoid this, of course, from happening. Furthermore, the question and this actually might be already the case when we apply a corridor, a price corridor to the TTF, but it would definitely be the case when we try to focus on a new index focusing more on LNG cargoes and global LNG prices. Furthermore, the question here is why should actually shippers...
I'm going to have to just ask if you could finish in a minute or two. Because,
no worries, I was almost done, Chris. Thank you. So the question here, last question when it comes to the index here, is why should actually shippers go with this index and not go for another index? And I think this probably might require legislation in order to make that happen. So it's another tricky, difficult question. So to conclude, I think there is no silver bullet here. That's pretty clear. And what I understood from the leaks is that the Commission is probably trying to get the best out of two worlds in terms of the index and in terms of the wholesale price cap. But I'm not sure if by getting the best of the two worlds, you are actually able to avoid all the shortfalls that come with these options. I would leave it there. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Bernd. Loved it. Oscar, you can go over time a little, so we'd love to hear what you can add to this.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I thought it was very interesting what Oliver said in a couple of places, where he said that it wasn't for us to interfere with prices, and also in option 8, that the price cap should only be applied after an emergency and not if markets are still working. And I think that's a mistake, with all due respect. And let me show you why I think that. I was looking at the welfare implications of a wholesale gas price cap for the EU. And the question that I was trying to address is why are economists generally opposed to price caps? The reason is that, you know, economic theory tells us that market prices gives consumers the correct signals that lead them to take efficient decisions that lead to the maximization of social welfare, where social welfare is calculated as the sum of producer surplus and consumer surplus. So therefore, imposing a cap on the price of gas would prevent consumers from buying gas, even if they valued it more than they would be willing to pay for it. And therefore, imposing a cap would reduce social welfare. And this is why economists dislike price caps. But that traditional analysis ignores the fact that most gas supplies comes from non-EU countries, and we don't care about the producer surplus of non-EU countries. And there's no way to redirect profits from non-EU producers to EU consumers. And also we have that the gas supply curve is inelastic. The typical analysis of how markets lead to consumption decisions which are consistent with the maximization of social welfare is this well-known diagram. Here I have drawn the supply curve as a long-term supply curve, which is perfectly elastic, and consumer surplus is denoted by this area. If I look at the supply curve in the short term, which is not perfectly elastic, we have consumer surplus, producer surplus, but there's an opportunity to transfer money from producers to consumers, and therefore the solution that maximizes total welfare, calculated as the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus, is indeed to have the price equal to the intersection between supply and demand, and to have this level of demand. However, what we have is that if the supply curve is not perfectly elastic, if it has a slope as in here, then consumer decisions impose an externality on all of the consumers. Look at what happens if consumers increase the demand from here to here. This is how much they have to pay. This is the price times the quantity. But it also means that all of the consumers have to pay more for their gas. And if we put them one on top of the other, what we have is that, you know, the total cost imposed by these consumers' decision to consume gas is much higher than the market price. And this is, as you will see, what justifies intervening and placing a gas price cap, even if the market is still working. You can actually draw a social marginal cost curve, which is simply, you know, doing this calculation at all the price levels. And what this would lead you to is to say, okay, we need to internalize, to create a surcharge, you know, the same way that we charge for CO2 emissions allowances, we should charge consumers for that externality that they're imposing on other consumers, because increasing the gas price to all other consumers. If we did that, then the demand for gas would fall, the price would fall, consumers would pay P1 plus the value of the externality, and we would have what here we call the deadweight loss. This is the loss of social welfare that economists so much dislike. And as you will see, this is actually not relevant. The reason is that we have that this is consumer surplus, this is the producer surplus, and this is the amount of money that is collected from the application of the surcharge, if a surcharge was indeed applied. As I explained, this can be transferred to consumers, and therefore what we have is that the total consumer surplus is given by this area. And this green area is higher than the original. It can be shown that this is higher or larger than this original triangle. So therefore, applying, you know, reducing the demand for gas actually increases social welfare at the EU level. And that would justify imposing a price cap at this level, which is the level that leads to a level of demand which is consistent with the social optimum. What does this, then obviously here, there would be a shortage, there would be supply interruptions, because at this level of price, demand would be this much and supply would only be this much. So there would be interruptions in the supply to consumers, but it would be efficient, or it would be social welfare enhancing, because it would increase social welfare. So the market price of gas is not currently leading consumers take decisions which are consistent with welfare maximization. And this is because, you know, the purpose, the objective is not to maximize the sum of consumers and producer surplus, but to maximize consumer surplus. And as I said, the supply curve is not perfectly elastic. What are the implications of this analysis? Well, first of all, that it would make sense to impose a surcharge on the gas on gas demand, which would be equal to the difference between the market price and the social marginal cost. This can actually be calculated. You know, the surcharge is equal to the externality, which is equal to the difference between social marginal cost and the private marginal cost. And for those economists amongst you, this means the surcharge is equal to the price of gas divided by the supply elasticity of gas. This is a number that can be calculated. And by way of example, if the price of gas was 200 euros per megawatt hour and the supply elasticity is 0.1, then the value of the externality would be 2,000 euros per megawatt hour, which is way more than the market price. So consumers are over-consuming gas because the signal that they're receiving is the wrong signal to maximize EU welfare. The second option would be to carry out auctions for gas demand reductions, where bidders could be paid much more than the market price of gas if they reduce their annual gas demand. They could be paid up to 2,000 euros per megawatt hour if we take the numbers in this example. And that would be welfare maximizing, which is a totally counterintuitive result if we look at the traditional analysis of how welfare is maximized, because as I said, we're only looking at consumer welfare. And the third option would be to place a cap on the price of gas, even if that leads to gas supply interruptions, as long as the consumers whose supply is interrupted value their gas less than the 2,200 euros per megawatt hour of gas. So to conclude, in the current context, the market price of gas does not lead consumers to take decisions which are consistent with the maximization of welfare within the EU. It is for us to interfere with prices, and the price cap is justified even if the market is still working. The second implication is that the application of the cap on the price of gas can increase EU welfare. You just have to make sure that the consumers whose supply is interrupted, the demand is rationed, value their gas less than the sum of the market price plus the value of the externality. The cap should not be set by reference to some historic or desired level. It should be set at that level which maximizes social welfare. The level of the cap should be reduced gradually to better assess its impact on supply. And the problem that we face, is it really possible to know which consumers value their gas the least if we apply a cap? As I said, there would be rationing, and then somebody would have to decide who is not going to receive gas. So the application of a cap on the price of gas is actually a third best solution. It would be preferable to achieve the gas demand reductions via auctions, because that would allow consumers to self-identify and say, well, I value the gas the least, and I am willing to reduce my gas demand if you pay me 1,000 euros per megawatt hour, not consume 1,500 or whatever amount is determined. And the auction should be organized at the EU level with our national quotas, with funding, with common funding, so that actually we can identify which consumers in the EU, within the EU, can reduce the gas at least cost. And finally, I want to stress that the objective of these measures, the objective of the gas demand reduction, the objective of the price cap is not to reduce how much is being paid to gas producers, it's not to reduce how much is being paid to Russia or to other countries, but to maximize EU social welfare by taking account of the cost that each consumer gas demand imposes on other consumers. So this is all to counter or to address the question as to whether we should, it is right for us to interfere with market prices and to impose a price cap, even if that price cap is below the market price of gas. And that is what I was going to present.
Thank you very much indeed, Oscar. I think that was really, really helpful in bringing us, giving us the, shall we say, academic economist view. I hope you'll agree that we can share your slides. It'll be very helpful. I think one challenge for you, if I can paraphrase Oliver, is how to explain what you've just explained on one piece of paper that a non-economist politician would grasp immediately.
I think that the key graphic is the one that I showed before, where you can see if the price, if a consumer increases gas demand, it's affecting the price that everybody else has to pay.
Can I just make a comment on this? I mean,
sure.
and that's really a policy comment, if I just may.
Oliver, I was just going to give you the floor before I give it to Andris to finalize. So here's your chance, Oliver.
I'm really sorry, because I was smiling. Yeah. I love to think out of the box. All I can say, and I love where you land with your presentation, but if you tell a politician, what I will do is to cap the price, and that will lead that the Chinese will buy our LNG, but that's exactly what we need because we consume too much gas. So it's kind of forced demand reduction. I personally feel he would be a bit scared. So I very much loved your idea then to introduce demand reduction auctions to go a bit another way. I would have loved them to be in our proposal. It's just, this is for me a typical example where communication with politicians, we need to be super careful. And that's also we cannot come with social welfare slides. We need to explain them what actually happens. And they would be dead scared, I personally fear, if you don't start with your end of the presentation, but jump to the beginning. So it's just a comment on this one because I was smiling a bit. I love the conclusion, but the way you presented it, in my view, could be a bit dangerous for a normal politician. Thanks.
I was just trying to build up to the conclusions rather than give the conclusions up front.
Andris, for you to close.
Yeah, well, I would like to thank Oliver for participating, and also Oscar, Bernd, Alberto, and Ilaria for excellent presentations. I think we get that now it's not only political choice, but also economic choice, that we need to do the best possible really to limit impact of increasing gas prices to the European economies. And there are some ways how it could be dealt with this, but there are some open questions where we can definitely help Commission. And now I think as a departing basis, we need to see what Commission has adopted today. We will know now it is 18 minutes. I was encouraged by a comment from Oliver saying that, well, don't trust leaks because the real proposal could be very different from it. So that's definitely thrills us all to look upon it. But also we understood the call from Oliver really to support him, really to provide for options of reasonable approaches for dealing with gas prices. So that is very much also political imperative, but it's also economic imperative that it is done in the best possible way. And there are options how to deal with this. And we have heard some of them today. So with this, I would close again, thanking everybody and definitely thanking Christopher for moderating the whole event.
Thanks, folks. Have a good one.
Chris, can I just say, yeah, are you still in? For those still in?
We are.
I wanted to use it for a little job offer. We are looking for contractual agents, lawyers. If there's an excellent lawyer, send your CVs to us immediately. We can hire an excellent lawyer. If there's a lawyer in the room that wants to work on this, these projects we are doing, you can apply now.